The Council of Seven Suns had made exactly 3 mistakes in the last 1,000 cycles. The first was declaring war on the Crithian hive, which cost them an entire fleet. The second was attempting to tax the merchant guilds of Outer Velos, which nearly collapsed their economy. The third mistake, however, was the one that would be remembered in every star system from here to the galactic rim. They took a human child. "This is absurd," High Counselor Varak announced, his 4 eye stalks swiveling to examine the small creature behind the containment field. This species petitioned for membership barely 20 cycles ago. Their homeworld still has active war zones. And you expect me to believe this? This infant poses any threat whatsoever? Ambassador Thren, a Quilaxian whose silver fur had long since turned gray with age, clicked his mandibles nervously. "With respect, Counselor, the reports from the frontier world suggest caution would be wise. Humans are unpredictable." "Unpredictable," Varak repeated, his voice dripping with scorn that would have impressed a master chef preparing acid soup. "Yes, I read your reports. Humans sing in their spacecraft. They name their weapons. They have emotional attachments to combustion vehicles. These are not the traits of a species we should fear, Thren. These are the traits of children playing at civilization." The human child in question sat cross-legged on the floor of her cell, humming something that sounded vaguely musical but mostly resembled the sound of a malfunctioning gravity generator. She was small, even by human standards, perhaps 9 of their solar cycles old. Her name was Dakota Reeves, and she had been in the wrong place at precisely the wrong time. Or the right time, depending on whose perspective you valued. "The human delegation will pay handsomely for her return," Thren continued, scrolling through data on his wrist display. "They have offered technology shares, mineral rights to 3 systems, and something they call chocolate, which their ambassador claims is incredibly valuable. We don't negotiate with species who owe us reparations," Varak snapped. "The human vessel Stormbreaker violated our space, engaged our patrol ships, and damaged a military outpost. This youngling is collateral, nothing more. Her guardians can collect her when humanity pays its debts." What Varak failed to understand, because his species had evolved on a paradise world where the most dangerous predator was a particularly aggressive fruit tree, was that humans did not calculate cost the way other species did. Humans, bless their violent little hearts, had a very different economic system when it came to their young. Dakota looked up at the council through the shimmering blue barrier, her brown eyes sharp despite the smudge of dirt on her cheek. "You know," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar human accent from Earth's western territories. "My mom always says that people who take kids usually end up regretting it pretty fast." "Silence, human," Varak commanded. "You will speak when addressed." Dakota shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both compliance and complete disrespect simultaneously. Humans were excellent at that. "Sure thing, buddy. Just trying to help." 3 levels below the council chamber, in the military wing where the real decisions got made regardless of what politicians believed, General Coast reviewed the same reports that Ambassador Thren had tried to present. Coast was Valorian, a species that had actually earned their position through combat rather than committee meetings, and he had survived enough battles to recognize a strategic problem when it was glowing red on his tactical display. "How many human ships are in our territory?" he asked his aide, Lieutenant Fern. Fern, young and still optimistic about the chain of command, checked her scanner. "According to our sensors? None, sir. According to basic probability and everything we know about human behavior? Probably 7 or 8, running full stealth protocols." Coast's breathing slits flared, which in Valorian body language translated roughly to a human's exasperated sigh. "Explain." "Sir, the human ship that violated our space, the Stormbreaker, it was a civilian transport carrying mining equipment. The crew included the child's parents, 2 engineers, and a pilot. When we engaged, the pilot transmitted a distress call before we disabled their communications." "Standard procedure," Coast said. "Yes, sir. Except human distress calls include something called a transponder code. Every human ship has one. And when a transponder code stops transmitting, Every other human ship in range automatically assumes the worst and responds accordingly. Coast felt something cold settle in his primary stomach. Defined responds. Well, sir, humans have this saying, which I admit sounds ridiculous when translated, but it goes something like, you mess with the cub, you get the mama bear. Fern pulled up a holographic display showing ship movements in nearby sectors. In the 6 hours since we took the Stormbreaker crew into custody, 17 human vessels have altered course toward our position. They are claiming navigational errors, trade route exploration, and in one case, tourism. Tourism, Coast repeated flatly. To a military border station, the human captain said, and I quote, always wanted to see what all the fuss was about. What's their weapons capability? Fern's mandibles twisted into what might have been a smile if Quillaxians had a sense of humor about impending doom. Sir, 12 of those vessels are officially listed as cargo haulers. The other 5 are, this is interesting, a medical frigate, 2 survey ships, a vessel registered as a mobile restaurant, and something called a pleasure yacht. And, unofficially, sir, humans install weapons on everything. We detected power signatures consistent with military-grade mass drivers on the cargo ships. The medical frigate has what appears to be a disguised missile battery, and the pleasure yacht is radiating enough electromagnetic interference to hide a small fleet. As for the mobile restaurant, our analysts believe it might actually be a restaurant, but the chef has a concerning military record. Coast pulled up the file on his own display, scanning through the human's service history. Captain Marcus Stone, formerly of the Earth Alliance Marines, decorated in 4 conflicts, specialized in hostile environment extraction. He looked up at Fern. They sent a war hero who cooks food? Humans are very passionate about their cuisine, sir. Back in the council chamber, Dakota had stopped humming and was now examining her fingernails with the intense concentration of someone who had decided that paying attention to captors was boring. This was, Varak would eventually learn, a very bad sign. The human remains remarkably calm, Observer Quinn noted from her position at the active monitoring station. Quinn was a Mendari, a species whose entire evolutionary purpose seemed to be watching things and commenting on them with all the personality of a statistical algorithm. Heart rate steady. No signs of distress. Curious. Children often fail to understand danger, Varak said dismissively. It's why most species protect them until they develop adequate threat assessment capabilities. Actually, Thren interjected, because someone had to be the voice of reason even if nobody wanted to listen. Human children are quite aware of danger. Their evolutionary environment included multiple apex predators. Human younglings are trained from an early age to recognize threats. Then why? Quinn asked, adjusting her scanning equipment. Is this one behaving as though she is at a social gathering rather than in captivity? Dakota chose that moment to stand up and stretch, her small frame barely reaching the midpoint of the containment field. Hey, she called out, waving at the bend. Council. Quick question. Do you guys have bathrooms in this place, or is that not a thing for you? Varak's eye stalks retracted slightly, a gesture of confusion. Bathrooms? Yeah, you know. Toilets. Places to pee. Answer nature's call. Drop the kids off at the pool. Dakota grinned, clearly enjoying the alien expressions of bewilderment. I really gotta go. The council convened in hurried whispers, consulting medical databases about human biological functions, with the panic of people who had just realized they had taken custody of a creature whose needs they had not properly researched. Humans require frequent waste elimination, Quinn reported, her voice taking on a note of alarm that might have been concern or might have been disgust. Approximately every 4 to 6 hours for younglings. Failure to accommodate this need results in, oh dear. In what? Varak demanded. Social mortification for the human, biological contamination for us, and what their databases describe as a very unpleasant cleanup situation. 5 minutes later, Dakota was being escorted under heavy guard to the nearest sanitation facility, which had been hastily modified to accommodate human physiology. 2 soldiers stood outside the door, their weapons trained on the entrance with the intensity of people guarding a thermal detonator. Inside, Dakota washed her hands and examined her reflection in the polished metal surface that served as a mirror. She looked tired, which made sense given that she had been awake for about 20 hours now. But she also looked determined, which would have worried the council if they had understood human facial expressions better. She pulled a small object from her pocket, something the security scanners had dismissed as a toy. It was indeed a toy, technically. A little plastic honey badger figurine her dad had given her for her last birthday. She pressed the hidden button on its base. 3,000 kilometers away, aboard the pleasure yacht Spirit of Venture, Captain Linda Zhao received a signal on her personal communicator. She looked at the frequency, verified the encryption, and smiled the kind of smile that made admirals nervous. "Mira," she called to her first officer. "Tell the fleet we just got the go signal." Mira Okoye, who had once held the distinction of being the youngest demolitions expert in the Human Defense Corps before she decided military life was too restrictive, checked her own console. "All ships acknowledge receipt. The restaurant wants to know if they should prepare for dinner guests. Tell Marcus to break out the good stuff," Linda said, settling into her captain's chair with the easy confidence of someone who had done this sort of thing before. "We're about to have company, and I want them to understand human hospitality." "The violent kind of hospitality?" Mira asked hopefully. "Is there any other kind?" Back on the station, Dakota returned to her cell with the docility of a creature that had accepted its fate. She sat down, resumed her humming, and waited. Humans, she had learned from her parents who worked in dangerous places, were very good at waiting. They were also very good at making sure the wait was worth it. "Status of the human delegation?" Varric asked Thren, because political leaders always asked questions to which they did not want answers. "Still demanding her immediate release. They have increased their offer to include medical technology and what they call music libraries, though I admit I don't understand the value of organized noise." "Denied," Varric said. "Humanity needs to learn that actions have consequences. They cannot simply wander through council space as though they own the stars." What Varric did not know, because he had never bothered to study human history beyond the sanitized version in the diplomatic files, was that humans had spent the last 10,000 years of their evolution learning a very specific lesson. They had learned it from predators that hunted them. They had learned it from environments that tried to kill them. They had learned it from each other during the countless conflicts that had turned their homeworld into a museum of survival strategies. The lesson was simple. Humans were the monsters that other monsters checked under their beds for, and humanity's monsters were coming to collect what was theirs. General Coast watched his tactical display with growing unease as the 17 human vessels maintained their courses, none of them deviating, none of them responding to hails with anything more than cheerful acknowledgments and tourist questions. "Sir," Fern said quietly, "we are being scanned. Multiple frequencies. The humans are mapping our entire defensive grid. Lock weapons on all approaching vessels," Coast ordered. "Sir, that would be an act of war against civilian ships." "Those are not civilian ships, Lieutenant. Those are wolves pretending to be sheep, and they are about to show us their teeth." He was, unfortunately, absolutely correct. The first indication that something had gone wrong came when the station's primary shield generator suddenly decided to take an unscheduled maintenance break. The second indication came when every door in the detention level simultaneously unlocked with the cheerful beep of a system that was absolutely not malfunctioning but was simply following new instructions. The third indication was when Dakota Reeves stood up, stretched again, and said to the empty air, "Honey Badger to Papa Bear. The doors open, and I am ready for extraction." The response came through the station's own communication system, bypassing every security protocol like they were suggestions, rather than military-grade encryption. "Copy that, Honey Badger," a male voice replied, warm and amused. "Papa Bear en route. ETA 3 minutes. Sit tight, sweetheart." Dakota grinned. "Roger that, Dad." Varrac's eye stalks nearly fell off. How is she broadcasting?" "We disabled all human communication devices." "Not all of them," Thren said quietly, staring at his scanner. "The toy. The little animal figure. It was a transponder." "A transponder hidden in a toy?" Varrac's voice climbed several octaves. What kind of species gives their children military equipment? The kind that lives on a death world, Thren replied. The kind that has learned that being prepared is not paranoia. It is survival. The kind that, and I cannot stress this enough, we should not have taken. Alarms began blaring throughout the station as the human fleet dropped their pretenses and activated weapons systems that absolutely should not have been present on civilian vessels. The mobile restaurant launched what appeared to be attack drones shaped like tiny forks. The medical frigate deployed boarding pods full of very concerned doctors who were also, coincidentally, trained in close-quarters combat. The pleasure yacht did something with its engines that caused 3 Valorian patrol ships to suddenly discover that their targeting systems had been replaced with what humans called dubstep, which was apparently a form of auditory warfare. Return fire, Coast ordered, but his weapons officers were already discovering that their firing solutions kept redirecting to empty space, courtesy of the human electronic warfare suite that was making a mockery of their targeting computers. In the detention level, Dakota walked calmly through the open door of her cell and down the corridor, following the illuminated path that someone had helpfully activated on the floor panels. She passed 3 guard stations, all of which were now empty because the guards had been automatically locked in supply closets by doors that had suddenly become very insistent about staying shut. She reached the docking bay just as a sleek human shuttle punched through the station's compromised shields and set down with the grace of a hawk landing on a particularly startled rabbit. The boarding ramp lowered, and a tall man in worn work coveralls strode out, his face breaking into a relieved smile when he saw her. "Hey kiddo," James Reeves said, scooping his daughter up into a hug that lifted her off the ground. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder." "Dad," Dakota replied, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Your jokes are still terrible." "Your mom says I should work on that," James admitted. Speaking of which, a woman emerged from the shuttle, her red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her expression caught between relief and the unique kind of anger that only parents of endangered children could achieve. "Dakota Marie Reeves," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 lectures. "We are going to have a very long talk about emergency protocols when we get home." "Yes, Mom," Dakota said, because even human children who carried military transponders knew better than to argue with their mothers at moments like this. "But first," her mother continued, her expression shifting to something considerably colder, "we are going to have a conversation with the people who thought taking you was a good idea." In the council chamber, Varrock finally understood the magnitude of his mistake when Captain Linda Zhao's face appeared on every display screen simultaneously, her expression pleasant in the way that predators were pleasant right before they explained the food chain. "Greetings, Council of Seven Sons," she said, her voice professional and utterly devoid of mercy. "This is Captain Zhao of the Human Defense Initiative. I am here to inform you that you are in violation of about 17 different interstellar laws, 3 human cultural taboos, and what we call basic common sense. You have taken a human child. You will now return her, immediately, and unharmed, or we will be forced to demonstrate why humanity's application to join the galactic community included a very lengthy section on rules of engagement." "This is piracy," Varrock shouted. "You have no authority here." "Actually," Thren said, his voice tired, "they do. I tried to tell you. Article 7 of the Sapient Rights Convention states that any species has the right to recover their young from unlawful detention using any means necessary. The humans filed the proper paperwork 6 hours ago. We've been in the wrong this entire time." Varrock stared at his fellow counselor. "You knew?" "I tried to warn you," Thren replied. "But you were too busy being offended by human informality to read the legal brief. Humans," and here he looked directly at the camera, speaking to Linda rather than Varrock, "take very good notes. They also hold very long grudges." Linda's smile widened slightly. "We prefer to call it institutional memory. But yes, we keep excellent records. Now, about that child. She's already gone." General Coast's voice cut in over the channel. "The Reeves family is departing as we speak. I have ordered my forces to stand down and provide safe passage." "General," Varrock, spluttered. "You have no authority to." "I have every authority to prevent a massacre," Coast interrupted. "Counselor, with respect, shut up. You have caused enough damage for one cycle." The human fleet maintained their positions for exactly 10 more minutes, just long enough for the Reeves family shuttle to rejoin the civilian transport Stormbreaker and for the entire convoy to plot a course out of Council space. Then, one by one, the ships powered down their weapons, offered cheerful waves over the communication channels, and departed. The mobile restaurant left last, and its captain, the infamous Marcus Stone, sent a final message that would be quoted in military academies for the next 100 cycles. "Next time you folks want to start something with humanity, maybe pick a fight we can't win. Taking kids?" He laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Nobody wins that fight, not even us. But we'll sure as hell make you lose it." Dakota sat in the Stormbreaker's observation lounge, a mug of hot chocolate in her hands, watching the Council station shrink in the viewscreen. Her parents were on the bridge, filing incident reports and probably swearing creatively at bureaucrats. Around her, the other ships of the rescue fleet were visible, maintaining formation like protective wolves. Her little honey badger figurine sat on the table beside her, its secret compartment once again hidden, just a toy that had saved her life by calling the cavalry. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers, and smiled. Humans, she reflected, were pretty good at this whole civilization thing. They had art, and music, and chocolate, and all those wonderful things that made life worth living. But they were also children of Earth, that beautiful, terrible world where everything evolved teeth and learned to use them. You could take humanity out of the death world, but you could not take the death world out of humanity. And anyone who forgot that lesson learned it very, very quickly. The Council of Seven Sons would remember. They would remember for a very long time. The diplomatic fallout arrived faster than a supernova and burned twice as hot. Ambassador Thren sat in his quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Quiet Reflection, reviewing damage reports with the enthusiasm of someone cataloging their own funeral expenses. 3 weeks had passed since the Dakota Reeves incident, and the galaxy had opinions. Many, many opinions. "So let me understand this correctly," said Ambassador Kelrix of the Thandorian Empire, her crystalline voice crackling over the secure channel. "Your council detained a human juvenile, activated a response from 17 vessels including a combat veteran who served soup, and somehow emerged from this situation believing you held the moral high ground." Thren's mandibles clicked in what translated roughly to a weary sigh. "The Council maintains that humanity overreacted to standard detention procedures." "Standard procedures," Kelrix repeated. And even through the audio link, Thren could hear her incredulity. "Tell me, Ambassador, how many species have successfully detained a human youngling and lived to file a positive after-action report?" "To my knowledge, none. That's because there's a reason most predator species protect their offspring with lethal force," Kelrix continued. "It's called evolutionary biology. Humans didn't climb to the top of their food chain by accepting losses gracefully. They did it by being so viciously protective that even their planet's apex predators learned to avoid their young." Thren pulled up a file on his display, one he'd been compiling obsessively since the incident. "I've been researching human cultural history. Did you know they have over 400 documented folktales about children being taken and the resulting consequences? 400? The common thread is consistent. Someone takes a human child. That someone then experiences what humans call finding out, which apparently follows closely after an activity they call messing around. The stories rarely end well for the one who initiated the taking." Kelrix made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been the Thandorian equivalent of screaming into the void. "Your council picked a fight with a species whose bedtime stories are warnings about kidnapping consequences. Brilliant. Meanwhile, on Earth, in the city of New Seattle where the rain fell like it had a personal grudge against umbrellas, Dakota Reeves sat in a conference room that smelled of recycled air and nervous politicians. Her parents flanked her, along with 3 representatives from the Human Defense Initiative, and one very tired-looking diplomat named Director Hassan. "So, Director Hassan began, adjusting his glasses with the precision of someone buying time to choose his words carefully. You triggered a military response that nearly started an interstellar incident. Dakota looked at him with the level gaze of a 9-year-old who had recently stared down an alien council. They locked me in a room. Dad gave me the transponder for emergencies. That seemed pretty emergency to me. She's not wrong. Her mother, Angela said, her tone carrying the edge of someone who had not forgotten or forgiven the last 3 weeks. They violated 7 treaties, council law, and basic decency. Our response was proportional. Proportional, Hassan repeated. Mrs. Reeves, your husband called in favors from half the independent fleet captains between here and the frontier. Captain Zhao alone commands enough firepower to reduce a small moon to gravel. James Reeves leaned back in his chair, his expression mild. Linda owed me one. I fixed her ship's environmental systems when everyone else said it couldn't be done. Besides, they gave us back our kid unharmed. That means we showed restraint. Hassan pinched the bridge of his nose. The council is demanding reparations for the security breach, the psychological trauma to their crade, staff, and what they're calling aggressive posturing. Counter-offer, Angela said, pulling out her own datapad. They pay us reparations for unlawful detention, endangerment of a minor, and emotional distress. I've already filed the paperwork with the Interstellar Court. I'm also pursuing charges under the Sapient Rights Convention, which has some very specific language about species that detain children without cause. Hassan stared at her. You're suing the Council of 7 Sons? I'm a contract lawyer. Director. I sue people for a living. And these people locked my daughter in a cell. Her smile could have etched glass. They're going to learn that humanity doesn't just have teeth. We also have paperwork. Across the galaxy, on the Valorian homeworld of Karas Prime, General Coast addressed a room full of military officers who looked about as comfortable as someone discovering their chair was made of live scorpions. Lessons learned, Coast announced, pulling up a holographic display that showed the Council Station's defense grid. First lesson: never assume civilian vessels are actually civilian. The humans have a saying, if it flies, it fights. They meant it. A young officer raised his hand. Sir, how did they compromise our systems so quickly? Because we underestimated their technical capabilities, Coast replied. Human computer science evolved in an adversarial environment. They've been hacking each other's systems since before they achieved spaceflight. Their entire internet was basically training ground for electronic warfare specialists. When they turned those skills on our networks, we might as well have been using paper and ink for all the good our security did. Another officer spoke up. What about the transponder in the toy? Surely that's a violation of some treaty. Actually, no, Coast said, pulling up the relevant documentation. Humans specifically negotiated the right to equip their citizens with personal safety devices as part of GRABS, their admission to the galactic community. They argued that as a young species in unknown territory, their people needed protection. The Council approved it, thinking they meant medical alerts. Humans interpreted it more broadly. How broadly? Every human child over the age of 6 receives what they call a safety kit. It includes a personal transponder, basic survival tools, and a data chip containing emergency protocols. The transponder in Dakota Reeves's toy was completely legal. We just never imagined a species would give military-grade equipment to children as standard practice. That's insane, someone muttered. That's humanity, Coast corrected. They're a species that evolved in an environment so hostile that their idea of childhood preparation includes kidnapping contingencies. Their schools run drills for hostile extractions. Their parents teach them hand-to-hand combat as a recreational activity. This isn't paranoia. This is pattern recognition, based on several million years of things trying to eat them. The room fell silent as that information settled like a brick through wet paper. Recommendation going forward, Coast continued. Treat every human as potentially armed, trained, and connected to a support network that will absolutely respond to distress calls. Treat human children as though they're baby death world predators, because that's exactly what they are. And for the love of all that's holy, never ever take one into custody without explicit authorization from their guardians, and at least 3 layers of legal protection. Back on the diplomatic front, the Interstellar Court convened in session 7743 to hear the case of Reeves versus the Council of Seven Suns. The courtroom, if it could be called that, was a massive amphitheater on the neutral world of Paxis, designed to accommodate 17 different species with wildly varying environmental needs. Angela Reeves stood at the human podium, looking remarkably composed for someone about to argue against one of the galaxy's most powerful political entities. Beside her, a Torgothi legal expert named Vrex clicked his beak approvingly. Humans, he'd discovered, approached litigation the way they approached warfare, with enthusiasm and an alarming attention to detail. "The facts are simple," Angela began, her voice carrying through the translation matrix. "On stardate 7731.4, my daughter was detained without cause by Council forces. She was held for 6 hours without access to guardians, legal representation, or basic needs assessment. Under the Sapient Rights Convention, specifically Article 7, subsection 3, this constitutes unlawful imprisonment of a juvenile." Councillor Varric, who had the misfortune of being selected to represent the council in this proceeding, rose to respond. His eye stalks swiveled nervously. The child was not imprisoned. She was held as collateral pending resolution of her parents' violation of council space. "So you admit to taking a child as leverage?" Angela's eyebrows rose. "Interesting defense strategy. Let's explore that." What followed was 3 hours of legal dismantling so thorough that several law schools later requested transcripts for educational purposes. Angela produced sensor logs, communication records, and expert testimony from child development specialists across 4 species. She demonstrated that the council had not only violated interstellar law but had done so with such spectacular incompetence that it bordered on criminal negligence. "Your Honors," she concluded, addressing the panel of judges, "my client, who is 9 years old, showed more understanding of proper protocol than the entire Council of Seven Suns. She remained calm, requested basic needs be met, and activated her emergency transponder as trained. The council panicked, escalated, and created an incident that could have resulted in actual military conflict. The question before you is simple. Will you hold them accountable, or will you describe and by sync send a message that the powerful can abuse the vulnerable without consequence?" The court recessed for deliberation. It took them 45 minutes to reach a verdict. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff," High Judge Moraxis announced, her voice resonating through the chamber. "The Council of Seven Suns is hereby ordered to pay reparations totaling 2 million credits, issue a formal apology, and implement new protocols for juvenile detention pending review by the Sapient Rights Commission. Furthermore, Councillor Varric is removed from his position pending investigation into decision-making competence." The courtroom erupted in reactions that ranged from approval to outrage. Angela gathered her materials, shook Vrex's claw, and walked out with the satisfaction of someone who had just proven that humanity's most dangerous weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their lawyers. News of the verdict spread through council space like wildfire through a dry forest. Species that had been watching the situation with mild interest suddenly paid very close attention. The Crithian hive sent a congratulatory message to the human embassy. The merchant guilds of Outer Velos offered trade discounts. The Thandorian Empire requested diplomatic meetings to discuss mutual defense agreements. And quietly, in military planning rooms across dozens of worlds, strategists updated their threat assessments of humanity with a new notation that read something like, "Do not engage unless prepared for total commitment. They will not stop. They will not negotiate. They will absolutely call their friends, and their friends have concerning weapon loadouts." On the Stormbreaker, now safely docked at Mars Station for repairs and upgrades, Dakota sat in the ship's common area with her parents and several of the captains who'd participated in her rescue. Captain Linda Zhao had brought wine, Marcus Stone had brought food that smelled incredible, Mira Okoye had brought stories that were probably 70% exaggeration but 100% entertaining. To Dakota, Linda said, raising her glass. "The girl who proved that humanity's best defense is being too much trouble to mess with." I just pushed a button, Dakota protested. You pushed the right button, her father corrected. At the right time. That's what we taught you. Assess, act, trust your people to respond. Speaking of responses, Marcus said around a mouthful of something that involved cheese and possibly slight violations of physics. Did you hear what happened to Varak? Lost his council seat, Angela confirmed. Also facing criminal charges on his homeworld for gross incompetence. Apparently, starting an interstellar incident is frowned upon in their political system. Good, Dakota said firmly. He was mean. The adults exchanged glances that said volumes about humanity's capacity for both forgiveness and grudge-holding. You know what the best part is? Mira said, grinning. Every species in the council sphere now knows exactly what happens when you take a human kid. We don't have to threaten. We don't have to posture. We just have to point at this incident and say, remember Dakota Reeves, and that's the end of the conversation. Is that really how we want to be known? James asked. As the species that brings overwhelming force to rescue operations? Better that than the species that abandons their children, Linda replied. The galaxy's full of civilizations that value order over people, process over protection. Let them see that humanity's different. Let them know that every single one of us, from the lowest deckhand to the highest admiral, will drop everything to bring one kid home. Dakota looked around the table at these people who'd risked everything for her, people she'd never met before but who'd come running because that's what humans did. They sang in spacecraft and named their weapons, and got emotional about vehicles, yes. But they also built communities bound by something stronger than law or profit. They built families, and family meant you never fought alone. So what happens now? She asked. Now, her mother said. You finish your education, we finish our contracts, and life goes on. But with better security protocols. And you, Linda added with a wink, get to be famous across half the galaxy as the kid who broke the Council of Seven Suns. I'd rather just be Dakota, she said. Too late. Marcus laughed. You're a legend now. The girl who taught the galaxy to fear the honey badger. Why do they call it that anyway? Dakota asked. The honey badger thing? Her father pulled up a video on his datapad, showing a small earth creature with black and white fur absolutely refusing to back down from animals 3 times its size. Because honey badgers are small, look harmless, and will absolutely ruin your day if you mess with them. They don't care about size or numbers or logic. They just keep coming until the end threat backs down. Dakota watched the creature fight off a leopard, invade a beehive, and generally act like physics and common sense were suggestions rather than rules. That's kind of amazing. That's kind of human, Angela corrected. We're a young species in a big galaxy, kiddo. But we punch way above our weight class, and we never leave our people behind. 3 months later, at the grand reopening of the council chambers on the station that humans had briefly turned into their personal playground, Ambassador Thren delivered his final report before retiring from diplomatic service. He was tired, his fur had gone completely white, and he had developed what humans would call a very dry sense of humor about the whole situation. In conclusion, he announced to the assembled council members, many of them new faces replacing those who'd learned the hard way about career-ending decisions, humanity has taught us several valuable lessons. First, never underestimate a species based on their apparent youth or inexperience. Second, civilian and military capabilities are not mutually exclusive, especially for species that evolved dodging meteor strikes and ice ages. Third, and perhaps most important, there are some things in this galaxy worth more than political posturing or territorial pride. He paused, letting that sink in. Children are one of those things. Every species here protects their young, but humans have turned that instinct into art, science, and apparently legal precedent. They have made it clear that you can negotiate with humanity on almost any topic. Trade, territory, technology. But their children? He shook his head. That's non-negotiable. That's where the diplomacy ends and the honey badger begins. Are you suggesting we simply accept human exceptionalism in this matter? One of the new counselors asked. I'm suggesting, Thren replied, gathering his materials and preparing to leave politics behind forever, that we recognize reality. Humanity is here to stay. They're loud, messy, emotional, and occasionally baffling. They cry at theatrical performances, laugh in combat situations, and pack survival gear in children's toys. But they're also brilliant, loyal, and utterly committed to their people. He looked around the chamber one last time. We can either work with them and benefit from everything they bring to the galactic community, or we can keep testing their boundaries and learning expensive lessons. I know which option I prefer. With that, Ambassador Thren walked out of council politics and into a comfortable retirement on a quiet agricultural world, where the most exciting thing that happened was seasonal harvest festivals and nobody ever tried to detain anybody's children. Dakota Reeves grew up to become an engineer like her parents, specializing in emergency systems and survival equipment. Her designs became standard across human vessels, and several alien species quietly adopted her protocols after carefully not admitting they'd been inspired by human paranoia turned productive. The honey badger figurine stayed with her through university, career deployments, and eventually to her own ship when she got her captain's license. She kept it on her command console, a little reminder that being small didn't mean being helpless, and being peaceful didn't mean being harmless. The galaxy learned to love humanity for their art and their humor and their inexplicable attachment to small furry mammals. But the galaxy also learned to respect humanity for their fierce protection of their own, their refusal to abandon the vulnerable, and their absolute commitment to the principle that some things were worth fighting for. In the end, the Council of Seven Suns made 3 mistakes in 1,000 cycles. The third one taught them that you don't cage a honey badger. You definitely don't cage its cub. And if you somehow manage to do both, you'd better start running before Mom and Dad show up with 17 ships, full of very concerned friends who brought snacks and a comprehensive battle plan. Because that's what humans do. They protect their own, they bring backup, and they absolutely will turn your military station into a teaching moment about why some species should really read the warning labels before opening the cage. The honey badger protocol remained in effect, quietly understood by every species, with enough sense to learn from other people's mistakes. Mess with the cub, get the claws. Humanity made sure the galaxy never forgot.